Okay, so we're now recording. So welcome to the Encampment Injunction report back. We wanted to have a chance to share back with the community or parts of the community some of the work that Keeping Six and HamSmart and Hamilton Community Legal Clinic has been engaged in over the last several months, and also invite reflections from people in the community around the work and lessons learned, as well as next steps. So we're really excited that people are here tonight to join us and hear us speak. So the first few minutes will welcome people and orient them to the evening and what we're hoping to share. And then we have a variety of different speakers who will be sharing their perspectives on the injunction and what's next. And then we'll finish with a Q&A, which is a chance to hear from folks who are watching about, what your thoughts, insights, comments, and questions are for the speakers and the groups. So we're streaming live on our website, keeping6.org/live, as well as on YouTube. There is a chat feature in YouTube. That chat feature is not going to be active during the speaking part of things, but if you'd like to submit a question at any time, there's a form on the Keeping Six website that you can use just adjacent to the live stream that you can use to submit questions, and we'll collect those throughout the evening so that then we can use them to frame our Q&A at the end. When the Q&A opens up, the chat function on the YouTube live stream will be enabled as well, so people can use that space for discussion. As you can see there, we're hearing from some encampment residents via pre-recorded videos because of issues around internet access. We'll hear from Sharon Crow, who's a lawyer with the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. We'll hear from Marcy McElveen, our street outreach coordinator with Keeping Six and HamSmart. We'll hear from Dr. Jill Wittruck, who is a doctor in the community and an organizer with HamSmart. And then we'll hear from Lisa Nussey, who is also an organizer with HamSmart and Keeping Six. We just wanted to share a little bit about who we are. So Keeping Six, the Hamilton Harm Reduction Action League, is a community-based organization that defends the rights, dignity, and humanity of people who use drugs. It was formed in response to the ravages of the opioid crisis by people who use drugs and those who love and care for them for the purposes of mutual protection and cooperation. Hamilton Social Medicine Response Team is an outreach service of general, internal medicine, and infectious disease physicians, family physicians, registered nurses, midwifery and outreach workers, whose goal is to provide excellence in clinical care to individuals who have difficulty accessing care in the traditional medical system. And then Hamilton Community Legal Center is a nonprofit community legal clinic that serves low-income residents of Hamilton. So land acknowledgements, I think many of us who especially are working in academia or in medicine or community organizations, we've started to see that land acknowledgements are becoming widespread, but also tokenistic and not necessarily a meaningful practice anymore, but more a thing that people do because they're expected to. But we also felt like it was really important to acknowledge the land that we're on and we're working on and how that relates to what we're talking about today. So we are living and working and caring for each other on the territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Treaty. The dish is this territory. The treaty calls us to recognize we all eat out of the same dish, we all share this territory, and together we must ensure there is enough in the dish for all of us to eat. And we are subject to the Two-Row Wampum, a treaty agreement initially between the Haudenosaunee and Dutch settlers, but now thought more broadly to apply to all European settlers, where settler and Haudenosaunee nations are each in their own boat, traveling down the river side by side, not interfering in one another's affairs, but mutually supporting one another. Acknowledging the land on which we are working today and standing today and the treaties that govern us is particularly vital in the context of what we're here to discuss today. So for those of us who are settlers, our government and our society is not honoring the treaties, and this directly contributes to homelessness. We take more than we need and we don't share resources. As we can see at 1492 Landback Lane in nearby Six Nations, we use our legal system and police system to take land that isn't ours and inflict violence on First Nations people. We use land to extract resources, we value people, profit over people, and we police people's lives, keeping them caught in cycles of poverty and homelessness. We cannot simply acknowledge the land. We need to act to dismantle colonization, build relationships of mutual aid and reciprocity, and seize the opportunities to leave behind the status quo and embrace the possibility of a world where everyone has what they need to be healthy, safe, and connected to community and the land. Because we only have 90 minutes together, we're going to try and keep things focused. We absolutely are aware of and in support of the Defund the Police organizing. And that group is also asking the city to act on homelessness and specifically to protect encampment residents. And we're grateful for their organizing, along with the work of other community partners like Acorn. And Acorn Hamilton does a lot of work around organizing, led by middle and low income Hamiltonians around tenant rights and protecting people's housing. And they had their annual power fundraiser just before this. So if anybody's joining us from there, welcome. But they are also such an important part of working to ensure housing for all in Hamilton. We wanted to make sure everybody was aware of this timeline of key events. It's on our website. We're not going through it in detail today, but it is helpful when there's so many conversations happening where there are different understandings of the timeline of what happened or of who reached out when or what conversations people were invited to or participated in. And this timeline, I mean, obviously it's framed from our perspective, but I think it's helpful. We think it's helpful to lay out some of the dates that we sent official communications, that we delegated to City Council when we heard back or didn't hear back. So I would really encourage people to check out the timeline for a sense of, what happened and when. Finally, just some rules of engagement. So I think most people who are choosing to take their time on a Thursday evening at 8 o'clock at night to chat about encampments are people who are genuinely interested in the health and well-being of our community. We also recognize that the encampment issue has been quite contentious in Hamilton, and we just wanted to lay down some rules of engagement for the evening so that everybody knows kind of what we're okay with engaging with during the question and answer and what we're not. So we're starting from a place that respects and promotes the dignity and human rights of people who live in encampments, people who are homeless, and people who use drugs. While we welcome criticism of our actions as community organizers, any language that does not respect people who are experiencing homelessness or people who use drugs will not be tolerated. Racist, homophobic, transphobic, sexist, ableist, or otherwise oppressive and violent language directed towards anyone will not be tolerated. During the presentation, people can send their messages or their questions to one of our moderators, Tim O'Shea, directly. So Tim is on the other end of the form on our website for questions. And then, as I mentioned before, at the end of the presentation, the chat box will be made public for the Q&A. Anyone who's not able to abide by the rules of engagement will be removed from the ability to participate in the chat, but we're happy to share a recording of the webinar with them afterwards, and we'll be sharing a recording of the webinar widely afterwards once we get it closed captioned. So on that note, I'm going to hand things over to our first speaker. So I'm really happy to welcome Sharon from Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. Hamilton Community Legal Clinic worked alongside Wade, who's a human rights lawyer in Toronto and Hamilton, to represent us in the injunction. So Sharon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Claire. So I'll just get started with a little bit of background. So Hamilton Community Legal Clinic and Ross and McBride were approached by Keeping Six in Hamsmart in the spring regarding several encampment dismantlements that were happening in Hamilton. And we learned that encampments were increasing in size or becoming more visible for several reasons. Including an ongoing shortage in shelter spaces, particularly for women or families, because of shelter rules that were leading to service restrictions from both hotels and shelter spaces, often for reasons related to the person's mental health or drug use. And also because of an increasing anxiety about contracting COVID-19 in shelter environments. And those factors had to be considered in the context of an already affordable housing crisis and the fact that there was a new pandemic that was creating further income loss. Keeping Six and HamSmart also explained the damage and trauma that happens to individuals when they are moved along without any suitable alternatives in place. So at that point, we began to advocate to the city, and in early June, Hamilton Community Legal Clinic and Rossa McBride, Wade Faziampa from Rossa McBride, wrote to City Legal Counsel as well as some senior housing staff with our concerns. We explained that dismantling encampments where there's an absence of suitable indoor spaces as an alternative violates the person's charter rights. So I'll just quickly explain what we meant by that. Section 7 of the charter protects a person's right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So in other words, our position was that if the city can't provide affordable housing and if they can't provide safe and suitable indoor shelter spaces, then at the very least, someone should be able to put up a tent to protect themselves. We also thought that Section 15 of the Charter was engaged, and Section 15 guarantees the right to equal treatment before the law. And because of the diversity of the homeless population, which included individuals who are racialized or people who have disabilities, there was a disproportionate impact on the dismantlement on those groups. And this part also tied into the right to be free of discrimination or harassment based on certain grounds such as race or disability that is guaranteed by the Human Rights Code. So we were fortunate that there were some, not really legal precedent, but some legal guidance on the issue of charter and the charter and encampments, primarily from British Columbia, where in recent years there had been a couple of decisions dealing with the issue where the courts had found that where there's an absence of suitable indoor spaces, primarily they were looking in the shelter context, that depriving someone of the ability to put up a tent to protect themselves from the elements amounted to a violation of their Section 7 charter rights. Both of those cases were limited victories in the sense that really all they allowed people to do was to put tents up overnight. Those tents were expected to be dismantled and taken apart in the morning, but there was at least some basis for saying that people should be allowed to put up tents where there's an absence of suitable indoor spaces available. So in response to our letter, the city did agree to meet with us, and we had a few meetings and discussions where we discussed our concerns. Unfortunately, weren't able to come up with any resolution or understanding as to how encampments would be handled. We did notify the city that if we were to learn of another planned dismantlement, that would unfortunately propel us into litigation. And so that's unfortunately what happened in late July, where our partners with Keeping Six and HamSmart were given about 3 days notice of a planned dismantlement of the larger encampments outside of Ferguson and First Ontario Place. So in late July, we filed a application with the court seeking a declaration that the city's efforts were unconstitutional. And we also had to file a motion for an injunction, which would prevent the city from any further dismantlements. So this had to move very quickly because of the timeline and the deadline that the city gave for dismantling the encampment. And the motion was heard a couple of days later. I think because of the speed at which it moved, we caught the city off guard, maybe called their bluff a little bit. And so at the first motion hearing, the city didn't actually take any position with respect to the motion. And so the injunction was granted for a period of 10 days. And during that time, the city was not allowed to um, dismantle any further encampments. So that was the start of the injunction period. We then had to return to court 10 days later, or roughly 10 days later, to get an extension of the injunction. And at that time, the city agreed to extend the injunction a little bit further, along with some additional conditions. For example, they wanted to ensure that the encampment sites would be maintained properly and a certain level of cleanliness. And then we agreed to return to court a third time to argue for a further extension of the injunction. Um, and then in late September, which was shortly before we were scheduled to return the third time for a motion, the parties reached a settlement. And as a part of that settlement, the application and the motion against the city were withdrawn and the injunction was lifted, and the encampment protocol was created. So I just want to quickly talk about the encampment protocol that was created as a result of the litigation and the settlement. So in our view, the protocol accomplishes several of the litigation objectives. So first, it allows for discretion as to how the bylaws get enforced against homeless individuals. Prior to the protocol, the city took a very narrow interpretation of the bylaws and how they got interpreted or enforced, or whether there was any discretion. So for example, the parks bylaw says that you can't sleep overnight in the park without a permit. And so the city would look at someone who is encamped and think, well, they don't have a permit and this isn't allowed under the bylaw, so we're automatically going to remove them. And so the protocol gives and highlights the discretion instead of just having a knee-jerk reaction to those scenarios. One of the most important aspects of the protocol is that it requires an individualized approach to encamped individuals. So it considers the individual's vulnerability using the VI-SPDAT tool as an assessment. And that assessment is used to determine what the housing options are for the individual. It also allows for some individuals, depending on their score on the assessment, to remain encamped indefinitely. Now, this is either because of their score or because of some special circumstances. Special circumstances isn't defined in the protocol. We wanted it to be as broad as possible. An example of a special circumstance could be where there are shelter capacity issues, or perhaps the individual has a history of service restrictions at shelters, which would, make you think that a shelter placement may not be an appropriate fit for them. For those who are lower acuity, there's a maximum 14-day time period where the city is required to engage the person. One more minute left. Oh, that went faster than I thought. Sorry. There are some restrictions on the encampments. So the first one is that they can be no more than 5 people located at one location. They can't be on sidewalks, roadways, or boulevards. They have to be at least 50 meters away from a playground, daycare center, or school. They can't be on a property with a heritage designation. And where the health or safety interests of a nearby resident is raised, there'll be a case-by-case analysis assessing their needs with the needs of the homeless individual. It's not perfect, and we're going to hear some of the problems that or shortcomings of the protocol, but it is by far a vast improvement from the previous system that was in place. It's also significant because of what we could have reasonably hoped to accomplish through litigation. The courts would have never allowed encampments without any kind of size restriction or location restriction. So those were definitely realistic in that context. And again, the individualized approach is very significant. I'm mindful of the time and that I don't want to encroach on other people's spaces. I'll just say that with respect to protocol going forward, as I said, there are some shortcomings. We are continuing to monitor the implementation of the protocol. We have highlighted some of the concerns that we have with interpretation to the city and let them know that we are going to continue to watch to ensure that it is interpreted in a way that respects individual rights. And so I will just leave it there. And if there's any questions, we can talk at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sharon. I know 10 minutes flies by. So, but thanks for that overview. That was really, really helpful. So what we're going to do now is start to hear some of the videos from some of the people living in encampments. So I will just share my screen.
My name is Mike Loker. I have been homeless for 5 or 6 months now. I used to live at Ferguson. When they called Tent City to destroy it, when they tore it down, people were scattered here and there, and they were telling them that they have to move. Well, they told me I could stay at Beasley Park if I choose to move to somewhere else. Me staying where I am, and you can't be told to be moved. I got a job. My stuff's not getting stolen. I live my own life. You don't want to tell me what I have to do. I don't have to worry about nothing. And I don't have to start all over again.
Why is it that you aren't able to stay in the shelters?
Hours are curfews. We're not 14. I'm 14, 15. How many teenagers have curfews? 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Okay, I understand you gotta be in certain time, but some people work at night. I work at night. I work during the day. Now, me being where I'm at, I work my own hours. Work when I want. And my boss is flexible like that too. He's been the same position as I am. And he's given me the opportunity. And hopefully, other people will give other people opportunities too. My name is Mike Loker. I am been home.
We don't need to watch it twice. Okay, so the next person that we're going to have speak is Marcy McElveen. She is the outreach coordinator with Keeping Six and HamSmart. And it's really the street outreach that's been happening since March that's formed the foundation for the encampment work and for the injunction. So Marcy, you're still muted.
Probably unmute in order to talk. All right, sorry, I got this. So again, as I've already been introduced, my name is Marcy McElveen. I am the outreach coordinator presently for Keeping Six / HamSmart. Give a brief overview. I joined Keeping Six in June, so shortly before the court and the injunction was in place, I think a month before roughly, if I look at the timeline. And in that time, we had been doing outreach 3 times a week prior, all through June. I think it started back in March before I was with the team. And we got to know some of the people. And as has been said before, we've followed encampment since sort of the beginning of March, beginning of the pandemic. And when the injunction was in place and Ferguson grew from a few tents to the numbers, everybody has different numbers, but I believe it went as high as 70, but I think some were storage tents. I don't know if there was always people in all the tents. I've seen a community develop directly in front of me and around me, and people's lives were saved. To see people that just care about each other. Like, sure, there was times when things happened, people got robbed, there was some fights, they were loud, there was some drug use, there was all all the things that people have read about in the paper and seen on the news and all the things that have been said that are negative about it. But the real story is the community that was built around it. The fact that people saved each other, the fact that people had access to services, to medical support, to see people in the community. I've seen families bringing out food. Sorry, I'm using a tablet, so it's kind of shaky. I've seen families bring out food, bring their kids by to bring water and blankets to people in tents. We had so many different groups that we weren't seeing before, right? And got to know people. We started a thing. There was a lot of complaints about garbage, so we as Keeping Six decided we were just going to get people to clean up around the tent, clean the encampment, and we paid them, and had support in that through other organizations, and people took pride in it. Like they would come seek me out and say, "Can I clean garbage today?" And whether that's because we gave them $20 for the day or whatever is beyond the fact that they came every day wanting to clean. And then they were asking other people to clean when it got messy again. And it was amazing to see people just care about each other. That's the main thing that happened, right? Like there was a lot of overdoses, which I'm sure people have read and heard about, but we don't talk about the fact that a lot of the people that saved them are their neighbors, right? We had a bunch of people volunteer from us. Our volunteer list grew substantially throughout the injunction, and people just emailed us and asked what we were doing and how they could help and what they could do, and not just community volunteers. A lot of our volunteers are like medical students and social work students, and we have some teachers from colleges and universities that are professors, I guess, sorry, that come out with us now that didn't before, right? We have students tell us going into the medical field that their opinions have changed, their language has changed, their bedside manner will be different because of their experience of working with the people that are experiencing homelessness on this level, right? Our peer volunteer group has grown to a point where we're finding other things for them to do. And it was amazing. For those of you that don't know, I have lived experience with homelessness, and I've lived in a tent, and I'll say again what I said a few months ago. Not one person I know woke up wanting to be there, but when there's no other solution, the gratitude they have, and I had for being given a tent and being allowed to be in a tent, was probably the most gratitude I had up until that point. I was able to look at my life, and people have told me they've looked at their life, they've made changes to their life, whether that's their drug use, their mental health, the fact that they're just seeing doctors that they didn't see before. I had parents come to me and say, "Thank you for doing this because I'm able to find my child." Right? I had a husband find his wife. Like families were reunited, maybe not completely to a point where people moved home, but they got to see each other and they didn't have to go looking because they were moved once again. Since the injunction was lifted, some things have changed. There is downsides to everything. Some people have been moved, but where others got to stay, and there's confusion around that for the folks that were moved, right? And the community people aren't able to go out as much. The families that were bringing soup and sandwiches at night aren't able to go because people are spread out. And the folks that are being moved have a harder time accessing appointments and sometimes showing up for stuff, right? But the fact that there has been some changes, I've had a couple people tell me that although it feels the same as it did before, because they have been asked to move a couple times, they feel that now that there's some sort of protocol in place, that there's a level of accountability towards it, right? There's someone looking out for them where they didn't feel that before. And I think that's a huge part of what we're trying to do, at least. I know sometimes we might fall short as a group. I speak for myself. Sometimes I fall short. I can't be everywhere and I miss some stuff, but we're doing our best to keep people safe, keep people connected, and keep people respected by other people. The people in tents are neighbors, just like the person in the house next to folks. And I think that's the biggest message that me as an outreach coordinator want to do. We want to get people involved and let's get to know each other, right? Hugest thing that could happen is have a conversation instead of criticism. And I think I talked either too fast or not enough, but I am going to end there if that's okay with everybody.
Marcy, thank you so much for sharing your insights and perspectives from the encampment. So we're going to now hear another video. So let's see if I can figure out how to share my screen again.
Dustin, tell us about yourself, starting with your name.
My name is Dustin Greening. I'm 25 years old.
How long have you been inside?
Going on 2 years now.
2 years. What are things you do to occupy your time?
Draw, hang out with friends, and try to make it to the next day.
When the injunction was in place and you were able to stay in one place without being moved, how was that for you?
It was a lot better than being tossed around because everything was kind of in like one spot. You know, didn't have to go looking for food or medical help.
Okay. Were you able to connect with more resources and stuff being able to stay in one spot than you do now?
Yeah, a lot more.
And did you get a chance to look at like your life in general and what was happening?
Yeah, it was a lot easier to try and make a plan to get off the street than it is being tossed around and constantly having to worry about where you're going next.
And where your stuff is and everything. Since the injunction has been lifted, how many times have you moved from that place or been asked to move?
I think 3 or 4 now.
In the past 4 weeks?
Yeah, about once a week.
Once a week. Holy shit. I'm good. How aware are you of the protocol on what's allowed?
Not very.
I.e. the 5 tents.
Yeah, well, that doesn't seem to be going quite to plan, you know.
Have you connected with any supports, housing workers, community workers, street outreach?
Yeah, I've got a housing worker and I connect with street outreach quite regularly.
Excellent. Is there anything you want the city to know about your experience?
That they can do a lot better job of whatever the hell they think they're doing because they're not doing a whole lot.
Yeah. Okay. And what should Keeping Six and Hamsmart do next to support people?
Go after the city again.
That's awesome.
So we have another video we'll share now.
Being outside for the last 2 years.
And when the injunction was in place over the summer, what were the benefits of it? What was good about it?
It was just like, it was a place for us to be, helping out each other and keeping each other on point, you know, and safe and whatever.
Safety's a big thing over there.
Mm.
Was there any bad parts about it?
Getting ripped off, people stealing from us. Cops just kept like doing what they wanted to do, just watching everything we were doing, and but it was a good thing in a way, you know. We could do.
And since the injunction's been lifted, how many times have you moved?
Twice.
Twice.
And they're still pushing us to move more.
Yeah. And since being where you are now, what is the community feel? What does it feel like? How do you feel about things?
I just don't like the fact that there's so much of this, like the houses and housing is all blocked off, but like they have houses that you can't live in, but yet there's so many of us out here, and they're pushing us to do things that we don't want to do. You know, like living in a hotel, like, whoa, I don't want to live in a hotel, man.
Yeah, now you want your own place. If you could say one thing to the city about what you need or what you'd like to see, what would that be?
For us to be housed, you know, we don't need. There's no reason why we should be homeless, man. Being outside for the last 2 years.
Okay, so now we're going to hear from Dr. Jill, as she's known to her patients and in the community, a physician in Hamilton and an organizer with HamSmart.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I think we all really appreciate the chance to share. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about this, of course, through the healthcare lens, which is how I have been involved. So very shortly after the pandemic was declared, more and more people were starting to sleep outside. I mean, we saw that right away. We knew that was coming, and it just ramped up as the weather warmed up, of course. And as a healthcare provider for people experiencing homelessness, I was trying to respond to these needs and seeing people at different encampments. So I got myself a collapsible 3-legged stool that I could fold up into my bag, which is full of supplies, healthcare supplies, lots of Narcan, wound care supplies, and others. And I would go outside someone's tent, in the park, outside the shipping container they lived in, wherever they were, and I would take out my stool, sit down with my computer on my lap, and provide healthcare. So I could chart directly into a chart for someone. I could change dressings and provide antibiotics, fax scripts to pharmacies. I could look up labs from hospitals and blood work. And so it was really like bringing a clinic outside. So I was making more and more connections with people and becoming increasingly frustrated with meeting these very sick people who I would start supporting and following just to lose connections with them when they're told they had to move elsewhere. You know, I think of the 70-year-old with pneumonia who was terrified of the hospital and the way he was treated every time he went there. And between working with outreach workers and others, we were able to check on him every day, bring him medications that he needed, and then all of a sudden he was gone because his encampment had been cleared. There was a young woman that I was following that was in urgent need of healthcare after delivering her baby. And I was able to follow her when she was living in her tent and provide this. But once her encampment was cleared, I lost her to follow up as well. And someone who really sticks with me is a young man who was desperate to start treatment for his opioid use disorder, for his addiction, so that he could get his life back on track and start seeing his kids again. And so I started supporting him in that. And right there in that field that day, we started him on addiction treatment. And working with a pharmacy close by, he was able to get what he needed to get every day near the tent that he was staying in. And his whole goal was to stabilize, get his life back on track, and see his kids again. And that encampment was dismantled, and he never did see his kids again because he died a few months later. So people experiencing homelessness are truly some of the sickest folks in our community. I'm just struck by a 2017 Toronto public health study that showed that while the average age of Torontonians is 81 and 85 for men and women, respectively, people experiencing homelessness in 2017 died at an average age of 48. So health is so much more than just having your blood pressure controlled. It's about housing. It's about having community. It's about having enough money to eat healthy food. It's about being free of discrimination and prejudice. It's about having meaningful activity in your life. And it's about housing too. Did I mention that? It's about so many more things. So I was seeing the awful effects on health as people were being moved from place to place, these folks that are already so sick. And I saw this advocacy as part of my job in caring for the health of my patients. And other respected international organizations agreed with this approach. You know, the Center for Disease Control issued guidelines early on in the pandemic stating that clearing encampments can cause people to disperse throughout the community and break connections with service providers. This increases the potential for infectious disease spread. So it wasn't just a personal health issue for people, but a public health issue also during a pandemic. So then we had the injunction in place, and all of a sudden I was able to provide healthcare and know where to find people when I needed to follow up with them. And with help and cooperation from all of our community partners, I could again start treating people's addictions who wanted it, treated infections that were being ignored, help women with prenatal care that otherwise might not have had it, passing messages along from specialists about appointments, filling out disability packages for people that were way too unwell to access help for this in the standard way. I made connections and gained trust with people that have long been wary of accessing healthcare through standard channels. And now my clinics are overflowing with folks from the encampments, from these connections that I made then, from the healthcare that I provided during the injunction. So as you know, eventually, I mean, from the moment we got the injunction, our goal was to negotiate with the city and come up with an agreement that saw people cooperating and working together for the best outcomes for folks. And sadly, the city did not sit down and discuss this with us until many weeks later. And when they did decide to sit down, it was, we came up with an agreement within 4 days. So by this time, some of the encampments were really large, especially the one at Ferguson Avenue North. And I think it's important to understand why the encampments happened where they did. Why did these large ones happen there? Well, there was a lack of access to services. There were no toilets for people to use. There was no place for people to wash their hands. Soup kitchens were closed. OW and ODSP offices were closed. People were not able to access the mental health supports, the addiction supports, the access to naloxone and Narcan, the access to harm reduction supplies. I mean, these things were shut down. And encampments happened around the places that were able to offer these services. That's why they happened around the Wesley Day Center, where people could, and around the First Ontario Centre, Salvation Army, where people could access food and laundry and bathrooms and housing workers. So that's why they got so large here. And we know, everyone knows there are problems with large encampments. Folks on the ground were telling us that too. We're listening to what they're telling us. There's some of the problems that Marcy brought up. There's theft, there's interpersonal conflicts between people that don't have a lot of tools to deal with it. There's lots of garbage and there's more. So the injunction, by the time the injunction was lifted, there were about 70 tents on Ferguson Avenue North. And shortly thereafter came the dismantlement of that. And of course, there's no question that the dismantlement was hardest for the people that were living, whose homes were being taken down, who had to decide what they're going to take with them when they leave. And it was also really hard on us as care providers, as people who'd worked with these folks throughout this entire time, who'd gained trust and relationships with them. Us being there to help with that dismantlement was a major way that we were able to minimize harm in what was happening as much as we could. We knew nearly everyone living in the tents and what their plans were and what their needs were and who they would allow to help them and what they would accept for care and what they wouldn't. So our advocacy was perhaps loudest on that day when the encampment was being dismantled at Ferguson and First Ontario Centre the next day. That's when we could really speak up for people that needed our help. So since then, in the interim, many people have got into hotels or shelters. The situation continues to be really fluid. So I see people who were living in the encampments all the time, and everyone has different opinions about it. There's absolutely some people for whom the indoor options have worked really well. They're happy to be inside and they admit that they needed the push to make it happen. And some of these folks have taken that opportunity to start working on some of the things that they need to do to reach their goals in life. Other people have been continually moved along since the injunction was lifted, and I'm watching their health spiral downwards. Many people who did access indoor resources like hotels and shelters, they either left of their own accord or were kicked out, sometimes within the first few days that they even got there. I mean, hotels are not for everyone, you've heard that. You have to look beyond the idea of just a warm bed at night and imagine what it might be for folks who are feeling so isolated when they're brought to a hotel on the other side of the city, away from all of their supports in their community. People that are often not welcome into other communities. They have a community that they feel accepted, where they don't feel judged, and that's where they need to be. Many people cannot tolerate being alone in a room. Some have trauma from institutions of the past. The minute they start walking down a hotel corridor, they start getting panic attacks. I hear about this all the time. So many of the same barriers exist you know, when you move to the shelter system, some of the barriers that other folks brought up earlier on, you know, you can't bring pets into shelters or hotels. You often can't, I mean, prior to hotels being around, you couldn't go into really any shelter, very few shelter beds in Hamilton as a couple. So couples would have to split up. There's always a capacity issue, and capacity issues continue. And we're continuing to monitor that. And that's, so I mean, there's lots of reasons why indoor options don't work for everyone. I would also note there's a recent CBC article acknowledging the capacity issue. I feel like we hear a lot from the city about how there actually is no capacity issue, but certainly it was just recently acknowledged, and we know, I mean, we see this every day. We simply see it. We know the capacity issue is there. So a bed might be open tomorrow. And I mean, I think things have really improved as far as capacity goes recently, but when folks can't get into a hotel tonight, but then there's one tomorrow, you often realize it's because someone else left, and they didn't always leave to get into their own housing. You know, there is a little bit of a cycle going on too, as people flow in and out. So really, I think in summary, I'm just seeing that there's a lot of positive things happening in the way people live in encampments are approached since things have settled down after the injunction was lifted. Things are not perfect, and they never will be until homelessness is solved. But at the moment, there are a lot of compassionate people working on this with a lot of cooperation between all of us, and I am very grateful for that. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jill. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your perspectives. I did just want to take a minute to encourage people to send questions in through the form on the website. Of course, we'll have like the YouTube chat feature going as well. I think for anybody who joined us at our last webinar, we tried that one on Zoom and started 15 minutes late because of some technical difficulties. And then this one we're live streaming on YouTube, but it doesn't lend itself in the same way to the conversation. So we're figuring all of this stuff out as well, but we would really love to get your questions, your critiques, your comments. So encourage people, if you do have a question, to share it through that form. I'm going to share my screen again, and we have another video.
Can you just introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
My name is Ashley, I'm 33.
My name is Daniel, I'm 38.
Okay, and which encampment were you living at?
Ferguson Street.
Ferguson Street.
Tent City.
Mm-hmm. And what were the positive parts of living in the tent city?
The numbers, there was safety in numbers because a lot of people are addicts out here, and we were able, personally, me and Ashley were able to save quite a few people that had overdosed out there. It was much easier to access programs, and for people in the community that wanted to help reach out and bring food for the homeless, bring clothing or what have it for us out there. It was easier for the community as well to access us all in one group.
Yeah. We have a sense of community. We were just together, we watched each other's backs. Nobody came to throw our tents out or anything. We had a crew of us, not all of us. There were some bad apples, but we had a crew of people that would clean up everything in the camp. So that was a positive thing, and everybody helped everybody, or one way or another. There's a few that said bad apples, but it wasn't as bad as it is right now.
We also lost a sense of belonging because we felt that while we were in the encampments that we actually belonged somewhere for a change in the city, not just in the gutter to stay. There was a lot of outpouring and support from the community while we were there, and
a lot of outreach too.
A lot of outreach. A lot of people got the help that they needed out there. Me, myself, one of them, got a lot of help out there. I got introduced to a lot of programs. I got introduced to a doctor that is amazing and takes care of me. And I got clean out there.
I just think that I think it would be beneficial for us to have an encampment, even if it was out of city limits, away from schools and stuff, because that seems to be what the issue is. So if they gave us that and gave us our community back, showers, food, and a place where people that want to donate, we could all be found together. The doctors can find us easily, and we can access programs that way, Keeping Six and all these other wonderful programs. They can't find us all. So to keep the programs running and to keep us, what's the word I'm looking for, us together and getting what we need and getting us on the right path and getting housing, I think that's important. We need something like that. We need an encampment, and we need a place where they're not going to come and throw our tents out, because it's not only costing the people donating them a lot of money in tents that they have to keep replacing it, but it's also damaging their trust in the organizations that spend so much time building a rapport, and now you have all the people that I can tell you, majority don't trust them anymore. They think that you're going to put them in a place where their stuff's going to get torn. We have people sleeping underneath in the rain and stuff because now they don't want their tents and stuff being thrown out because it's happened more than once.
I personally think disbanding the camp at first in the tent city, if you want to call it that, I think disbanding it was a big mistake, because now you've taken where we were all in one area and easier manageable, and you've spread us out throughout the city to different areas. We're back to police harassment in a lot of the encampments. Police are still coming, even though there was a deal made where we could have small encampments in certain areas. Police are still coming and pushing people along the way now. I also feel that it's really damaged the emotional well-being of a lot of people, that we're getting better out there. We were getting help and we were getting programs. We were getting steered in the right direction. And now we're left to fend for ourselves again. And look what it's doing to the city. You have encampments everywhere. It's not as clean. You have people, I see people online all the time complaining about it. They're not informed either. About what's going on with these encampments and why it is the way it is. The loss of information that was flowing is just astronomical.
Can you just introduce yourself?
So we received some feedback when we, after the settlement happened, and certainly like a wide range of perspectives and opinions. And one of the emails we got was from a longtime Hamilton organizer and community member. And part of her email to us was, I was hopeful when you got the injunction, yet I was disappointed that you all folded under pressure. So our next speaker is Lisa Nussey, who is a longtime community member and organizer in Hamilton, and a co-organizer of HamSmart and Keeping Six.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be with you. It's really important to us that we have this final sort of, not final, but this sort of wrap up at this stage of our work. And it feels really good to be together and sharing our process with you, and some of the lessons learned, and responding to some of the support and also the criticism from the community. And so that quote that Claire led into this section with, and listening to Daniel and Ashley and other comments that we've received, they really weighed heavily on us throughout the course of this entire process. We took enormous pride in standing alongside people in encampments, standing up for their rights, dignity, and humanity, and keeping with our mandate of Keeping Six. And the last thing we really wanted to do was let people down. And we took that so seriously throughout. And at every stage, we really checked ourselves, went back to the community, tried to figure out what the next best step was. It was mentioned that we knew going into the court process that we wouldn't be able to defend these large encampments, and so we hear that from the community that the encampment was beneficial to them, and we also really needed to work within the confines of what was possible, lest we lose everything. And it needs to be said that we were also really committed to a negotiated solution from the beginning. And we, at the same time, know that many people were really invested in the stand that we took and wanted us to see it through to the very end. And we really respect that position and respect that fighting spirit. But a lot of things went into our decision to first call for negotiations and then really continue to push for them all the way through this. First, we were quite confident in our case, and Sharon outlined some of the precedent from BC that was going to be helpful for us. But we really did put a lot of effort into creating our court documents and the case for why people shouldn't be moved, particularly in the context of the pandemic, but also from a purely human rights perspective. And we never lost sight of the fact that we could lose everything in court, and so that weighed heavily on us. And I think importantly too, winning in court could have put us much in the same position really as we were going into the talks. And in fact, our proposal to the courts, given what we talked about in terms of the realistic expectation that we might be able to defend those large encampments, we had to put in a proposal that proposed smaller encampments from the beginning. And so we would have ended up in the court system probably with something much like what we actually achieved in the negotiations, although admittedly, perhaps with a bit less compromise. But that wasn't for sure either. And, we started the lawsuit as a last resort and we were willing to see it through, but as we worked our way through the process, and we were really taken aback by the vitriol of the city, the real viciousness with which we and the people in encampments were attacked. And also in connecting with other people across the country who were doing similar work to us, as you probably recall, and still right now, encampments are a hot button issue during this pandemic, from coast to coast, really. Those conversations also sort of reinforced our commitment to de-escalating the situation as much as possible, whilst maintaining our principles and upholding the dignity of people in encampments. So I just want to touch on a couple of those things that sort of strengthened our convictions that we should be pushing for a negotiated solution. And one of the things that we learned from talking to people across the country was that when you remove the bylaws from the toolbox of moving people along in a context of such contempt for people experiencing homelessness that we see here in the city and really across the country, the tactics escalate. So police tactics escalate, city tactics escalate. We were hearing from people across the country of things like 5 a.m. wellness checks, police slashing tents and raids and arrests. And some of you may have seen the images coming out of Montreal just in the last couple of days where a large encampment there was dismantled, and you had police coming in on horseback and forces in large numbers tearing down encampments. Protests against encampments in Toronto and even citizens on the West Coast countersuing and taking people to court to have the tent cities dismantled. And of course, we have massive problems here with police harassment and stigma towards people in encampments and homeless people, but we don't actually have those. Our assessment, our read of it in keeping with the community was that we didn't have that extreme situation here. And we worried about bringing that about if we kept pushing when we could, in fact, negotiate a solution. And I just want to be really clear that I don't subscribe, and we didn't subscribe to the notion that any kind of resistance is responsible for repression, but it was really a fact that weighed heavily on us because we didn't feel we'd really had the time to work to achieve the consent of people who were going to be on the receiving end of that brutality if it were to escalate. And also, if we were really clear as a small organization that we didn't have the capacity to support people through that kind of escalation of surveillance and violence. And so that was one of the things that definitely weighed heavily on us throughout the process. We spoke to the people on the West Coast who are decades ahead of us on this question of encampments and harm reduction. And they spoke to us, notwithstanding what Sharon was talking about in terms of the precedent coming out of BC, that also there is to some extent they had exhausted their legal avenues out there, and that lawyers were in fact refusing to take on encampment tenants because every time, not because they didn't want to do the work, but because every time there was a case in the courts, they were setting a worse precedent. So that gave us pause to really consider the limitations of a court settlement and how and when to play our cards with that particular mechanism. And then finally, we had a really influential conversation again with folks on the West Coast, really, really entrenched in the mechanism of law for dealing with these the repression against encampments, excuse me. And they spoke to us about the tolls that the court cases were taking on them as an organization. And one of the organizers told me that in fact, every time they go to court, and these court cases can be very protracted, as you know, that they would lose their organization for a whole year while people recovered. And so that was a really serious matter for us to contend with as well, because we're a small organization and we've grown a lot in the last 8 months. But we were really worried about expending ourselves and not having the capacity to do the other important work that we're doing on many fronts. I want to talk a little bit about also what we've learned through the process. And I think I probably could talk for days about what we've learned through this process, because it was like a crash course in many systems, not the least of which was the legal system. You know, one of the things that, to start with something really positive, we learned just how much support there is in the community, how wonderful the people of Hamilton can be and are, and how much they were really interested in rising to the occasion. You know, we would get, as Marcy mentioned, we would get lots of emails, people wanting to support, the overflow of people wanting to volunteer on outreach. And at some points, many points, in fact, we couldn't keep up with the offers of support. The tent drive, the suitcase drive, all of which were very, very, very successful. And at the same time, I think we were a little bit surprised to see the ways in which that folks working in the sector who really were supporting what we were doing felt constrained and unable to really express publicly the support that we had, to the extent that we felt quite isolated, and that we learned that in keeping with our principles, that people who are on the front lines really do have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of expertise and really great ideas of how to intervene into these issues. But there's this disjuncture between the folks working on the front lines and the folks working in management. And that was in that we couldn't really crack in terms of getting information coming from the ground to sort of inform policy making. The negotiating process is something that was really, really new to us, and we learned at warp speed, let me tell you, but it wasn't fast enough. And we're so grateful to have always stuck to our organizing principles of being grounded in the community, because it served us very well at the negotiating table. But the pace was really fast, and I think there are details that we may have insisted on taking more time with if we were to ever have to do it again, primarily having to do with some things to do with process, and we can feel that in the confusion in the rollout. And importantly, I want to say that we know that this protocol also doesn't address issues of racism in policing and housing and harm reduction sectors, and there are deep problems of racism and representation in all of those systems. And we are working as organizations, both as HamSmart and Keeping Six, at addressing that in our own ranks and also in our respective sectors. And it's a very serious issue, and I'm happy to actually talk about that in the Q&A if people are interested in what we're doing internally a little bit. And also we, of course, look to some of the excellent work being done by Black and Indigenous youth in Hamilton for leadership on that front. I just want to finish with maybe a few words about maybe summarizing how, am I doing okay for time? I can't see you, Claire, so you'll interrupt me when I need to stop. But I think that one of the things that, you know, we're really proud of the work that we did. We saw a problem in front of us. We took a stand. We learned very quickly what taking that stand meant, and worked our way through it, as Marcy says, as best we could. One of the things that we really do feel that we accomplished was really pushing this conversation into the public eye and into the discussion. There were weeks on end where it was in the papers every day. Everybody was talking about it, you know, and people really had to choose sides in some way, whether they took issue with homelessness or its visibility. And that felt like a real accomplishment to us. And I think one of the things, you know, it also accomplished a mobilization of resources, the injunction did. There was a GIC debate yesterday that was spurred by a report on the expenses incurred throughout the encampment. And I know it was meant to be a jumping off point for smearing us and other organizations doing this work, but it actually, to me, really reads like a list of accomplishments that we achieved in a very short period. For example, 2 full-time outreach workers were assigned. So there were 2 full-time outreach worker positions created because of the increased number of injunctions, or increased number of the visibility of people living in tents, let's say. There was increased collaboration across sectors, more hotel rooms open up, and I think a genuine effort to try to keep people indoors. Again, as Jill mentions, there are still definitely people who are not being able to stay indoors. We forced an acknowledgement at the level of the city that there are people who have nowhere else to go. It's hard to imagine now, but there was quite some time where no one would even admit that, right? And while it was recently admitted in a really poor framing by the mayor, when we say some people have nowhere else to go, what we mean are there no viable options for them, not that the people are terrible, but at the same time, just to have an acknowledgement as a starting place to work from, I think was a really important accomplishment. Marcy talked about how the process was created. There was a process and a protocol where none existed. And that gives us something to refer back to hold people accountable to. You know, when this all started, we sent reams of emails saying, who is this encampment task force? Who is on it? What is its job? How does it make decisions? And we would be stonewalled and eventually to learn that in fact, there was no process, there was no anything other than a 1.5-page document, which was basically a list of the agency or the people on it. Now we have an identifiable task force. We know who to go to. We can look to the protocol. We can insist that it's enforced in the spirit in which it was signed. And obviously, as we've all seen here, it is not perfect. It has not solved homelessness, but we do feel that it has accomplished this thing of having people acknowledge that there's nowhere else to go. The first 2 weeks, I just want to take a couple more seconds to say that the first 2 weeks were really hairy with the rollout of the protocol, and we came out strong against that. The legal clinic sent letters. We were on the ground as much as we could be to mitigate people being displaced. And I do want to mention that since that first 2 weeks, however, which was very bad, there's been a slowdown in the moving of people from place to place. You heard in the videos that people are still moving, and we're working on supporting people through experiencing that. To the best of our knowledge, since the end of October, there's not been an instance, with the exception of the demonstration at City Hall, which is an important exception, in which the city has shown up at an encampment to evict people and they've been forced to move to another park. They've either been permitted to stay or have gone inside or have left before the deadline of their own accord. Now, that's an important detail, that people are leaving of their own accord. And again, we're sorting through that to figure out, is it that people are being pressured and so are leaving? Is it, we don't have a handle on that yet. And we're going to keep working on that. So the protocol, we've all said repeatedly, is far from perfect, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we wanted it to be a start and not an end. It does provide mechanisms for people in the city, for the police who want to do better, to not move people along, to do that. We have in fact seen that, and there's still greater potential for that to be exercised. I think we're one of the next things we need to do is really push for those special circumstances that have not been leveraged to their full capacity yet to be leveraged. I think that lastly, I'll just say that as I mentioned, it's not an end, but a beginning. And we had hoped to open the space for others to take up the fight for decent housing. And we see that going on now with the defund movement at City Hall and the important work that ACORN is doing. Hi, folks from ACORN, if you came from your power hour, thank you so much. On evictions and all of that work needs to be supported and understood as deeply connected to this work. I'm supposed to talk about what's next. I'm going to do that until Claire tells me to stop.
Oh, I've told you, like, I gave you a 2-minute warning, then a 1-minute warning.
I told you I couldn't see you. You're supposed to talk. I'm done?
So, yeah,
okay, it's okay. I can stop.
Share your final thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, my final thought. My final thought is the next steps. We're very worried. You know, you've probably seen some news articles this week about 7,000 eviction notices. being issued in the last couple of months. What is the spring going to look like? It's going to be really important to be on top of that. And what we hope going forward is to take this work to bring to people the notion that human rights, the housing is a human right, to encourage people in encampments to stand up for their rights as they have done all along, but to give people even more tools to do that, and to shift the culture so that the protocol is put in place and leveraged in the spirit that it was intended, and then to move forward from there to more progressive policies that don't institutionalize encampments, but recognize them for the harm reduction practice that they are as we move towards safe, dignified housing for all.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Okay, so we're going to watch one last short video from the encampments, and then we'll go, or from, sorry, people living in encampments, and then we will go back to, oh, that glue was there because Lisa is our glue. She's the one that keeps us all together in many, many ways. So yeah, we have one more video and then we'll go into Q&A. So now is a great time to submit any questions or critiques or comments.
It's rough out there. It's changed like over the last, say 10, 15 years. Being out on the street, it isn't the same. There's not as much help as it was before, but the people of Hamilton are the best people in the world. They're there to help with clothing, food, whatever have you, blankets, clothing, sleeping bags, tarps, anything. And Roger with the men's ministry, top notch, helping out those guys, and the people with the harm reduction and the keeping safe street people.
So on that note, that sort of concludes, I guess I can do this dot sharing, or maybe I can move this slide forward, but that concludes our,
it's rough out there. It's changed like over the last.
Sorry guys, still figuring out the internet these days. So yeah, so that sort of concludes the report back portion of things. Obviously there's so much more we could say, but we wanted to hopefully keep it like a manageable, digestible amount of time and information. So we've got some questions now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I've got questions and I'll pose them to the group, and whoever wants to answer can answer. So the first question that we have really actually builds on what you were saying, Lisa, just at the end there, which is what are our next steps, or what are your next steps with respect to encampment? So if there's anything that you want to elaborate on, or that anybody else wants to share in terms of next steps with encampments.
I could speak, I guess, if everybody's quiet. I think from an outreach perspective is, again, just staying engaged with folks and supporting them and meeting their needs in any way that we can. And just trying to help them, maybe be a voice for them in situations that their voice is lately not heard, or misinformed or miscommunicated. And just being there for the people that need people to be there for them, in spite of the fact that some people, I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say. If that doesn't make sense, I'm sorry, but keep doing what we're doing and hold the city and those that make decisions, or decision makers, for lack of a better term, to account on what they agreed to, and hopefully change and broaden that, right, to allow people to be where they are, and hopefully in ways hold, and it's like, I don't know how to say it, but the shelters and hotel system to account, and make it more accessible. As we've heard, like, some people are going there and leaving a couple days later, either by choice or by restriction, and we want people to be able to live where they feel safest.
Yeah, I agree, Marcy. I also think that what's going to happen, I mean, my understanding is that a lot of these hotel rooms and extra like shelter capacity is funded with COVID money. And when that runs out, I shudder to think what is going to happen with all the folks that are currently in those shelter spaces. So I think, and you know, it's an evolving situation, and maybe the funding is going to turn into a long-term thing. I don't know, but there's going to be a lot of eyes on the city to see what happens in the spring, and where we get to then.
Mhm. I mean, and similarly, the funding that we have for K6 and HamSmart outreach is till the end of March. So what happens after that? Sharon, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. From a legal perspective, is there anything next to be thinking about with respect to the encampments?
Well, generally speaking, as I've said, and we've heard from others, we're monitoring the situation. We want to see the protocol applied in a way that respects people's charter and human rights. If that's not being done, then we're certainly open to litigation again in the future, either individually, like individual applications, or something like an injunction again going forward. It just really depends on how things unfold and you know what's happening to individuals. And some of the options may change depending on the season, right? Because you know, we're expecting that there will be somewhat of a thinning out of encampments with the winter, but we are also in uncharted waters with the second wave and the numbers increasing, so that might actually result in more people choosing to sleep rough. So yeah, we're just monitoring and seeing how it goes.
There's another question about the settlement. So can someone speak to the exclusion of heritage and environmentally sensitive areas, and why that was put into the agreement and what that means?
I don't have a specific example of an environmentally sensitive area that comes to mind. Maybe if someone else in the group can add to that. But with respect to the heritage designation, at the time that we were negotiating, there were encampments at Whitehern House as well as City Hall, both of which have heritage designation. I think there's concern about, you know, property damage to places that have the designation, and it might be more difficult or costly to repair. And so I think that was the rationale behind the heritage designation. Environmental, I don't know, Jill and Lisa, if you're able to speak to that.
Environmental designation refers to something like somewhere where there's an effort to restore sort of like a precious ecosystem, or so it is not, there's very few places where that would really apply as it relates to this protocol, because they're places where, generally speaking, people are not setting up encampments.
And I think
I don't think we've seen that come up as an issue, have we?
It's a good point of clarification, though, because I think some of the things that we heard were that people thought that meant parks, or that meant like any environmental space. And so that's helpful to clarify. Another question is, who determines the acuity score or the VISPADAT score that determines who sort of is exempt from having to, like, exempt from the protocol or exempt from being moved along?
So the VI-SPDAT is something, it's a vulnerability index SPDAT, and I actually am forgetting what the SPDAT stands for, but and it's been used for a long time in the housing sector already. So it was a tool that was already being implemented, and it helps determine the services and where people are going to kind of fit in. So there's different levels of acuity, and the scores that were used. We went with this score because it was one that was already in widespread use and had some evidence backing its use. Being not perfect. Lisa?
Yeah, and then maybe if I could just say, because that is one thing for sure, there's lots of criticism around the VI SPDAT or any kind of standardized tool for that matter. But as Jill's mentioning, it's something that's used very common, like it is the sort of tool in the housing and homelessness sector that's already in use. And so there was the way in which we really were able to push back with that was by pushing for these special circumstances. I think the question was really about, was also about who does the VI SPDAT. And
Yep.
there is a number of people in the city, outreach workers, outreach workers primarily, who are trained to do those VI SPDATs and who are, I don't know if there's Marcy, is there a qualification specifically for it? But not everybody just can pick up and start doing VI SPDATs. So the Mental Health and Street Outreach, which is the city's outreach team, is primarily responsible for doing those. And then there are other housing workers who are also empowered, I guess, to do those.
If I can just quickly add from a legal perspective, where the courts have examined people's rights to use tents, they've considered things, they put a lot of emphasis on the availability of shelter space. And so where there is shelter space, the presumption is often that people should be accessing that. So by having a tool in place that allows for additional discretion and individualized assessment, there's not this automatic presumption or requirement for that people simply put up and shut up with a shelter space.
It does highlight the difficulties of working within a system that is not set up to treat people well and with dignity, though, you know, like I think we're working within the systems that we have and the tools that we have. But, you know, in doing that, there are limitations, obviously, to that as well. Marcy, did you have anything you wanted to add? I felt like I saw you like almost talk a couple of times.
Well, I think with the VI SPDAT is not, it's not a perfect tool. It's a tool that was already in place and accessible. Again, it's a questionnaire done by folks, and people's answers can differentiate based on the trust level they have with the person doing the test, or doing, not a test, but doing the questionnaire. If they've just met you that day and they're doing it, they may not be as open with some of the questions. The questions do go into like trauma and self-care and addiction, right? Mental health. And if you just meet someone, you might not be as open as someone you've known for a while. So your score would fluctuate on any given day in any given circumstance. So it isn't a perfect tool, but it does show, well, like, show acuity, right? And again, there is the special circumstance thing written into the protocol that allows for us to fight, not fight back against that. I don't think fight's the right word. Sorry, I probably, like, just again, about holding people accountable and meeting people on an individualized basis.
And the next question is, I really appreciated Marcy's comment that the community in the encampment kept people safe. What can we do to expand and strengthen the sense of community, not just among unhoused people, but between unhoused people and housed residents of Hamilton?
I'll speak to that first, if that's okay. I didn't think I was going to answer questions at all, but okay. Again, I think I said it when I was talking, is conversation instead of criticism. I think a big thing that stands in the way and a big barrier for me, personally, like throughout my journey, a lot of change and a lot of relationships and a lot of my own biases were created out of fear and just unknowing, right? So I think if people just go say hi to someone, I think is the best way to build community, is just to say hey, and not what can I do for you, just what do you like, how's your day going? It doesn't need to be about like what a person needs or what we assume someone needs. It can just be about where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, we're all neighbors, and we just have to remember that we're all neighbors. We're just doing our best.
Okay, so this question is sort of building on, I guess there was a couple like iterations of that question. So how can housed residents and neighborhood associations specifically best support your efforts and support the folks who are homeless?
We're always taking volunteers.
Yeah, so if you want to volunteer, feel free to email volunteer@keeping6.org, and we can send that out as well afterwards. But, winter is coming. We're still doing outreach twice a week. Any other thoughts on specific ways that neighborhood associations in particular can support people who are living rough?
Communicating with their counselors to
Yeah.
voice their support.
May I? Were you done, Sharon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think this is a really important question, and because in part the encampment task force is driven to intervene in encampments by complaint basis, and so neighborhood associations could play a really important role in creating a culture in their neighborhoods of not having people call complaints in. There's any number of neighborhoods, mine included, have Facebook pages that are devoted to gossiping and spreading, vitriol about. We should do a word count on how many times we said vitriol tonight, about people who are living rough. And so intervene in those conversations and share information. One of the things that we hope to do in next steps is to actually really push this idea that housing is a human right. And so we hope to have a campaign maybe coming up soon where we could go door to door with flyers that talk about why do people live in encampments? What is it like literally the legislation around housing as a human right? What does it do when you call in a complaint? Many people might think that it's inconsequential, but it is in fact quite consequential, and that building that culture in your own neighborhood is a really valuable contribution to this fight. And then obviously also, as Marcy's saying, meet people. I think that's really important.
Okay, so we have two more questions left that we're going to go through, and I've tried to sort of bring some questions together that have similar themes. So the next one is with the Defund the Police group, which is also working on this issue of encampments and homelessness. How do you see sort of the work of HamSmart and Keeping Six working with Defund the Police, or the relationship between that work?
So Keeping Six and HamSmart have both signed on to the Defund the Police mandate back in the summer. And we did that because we saw just the connections that the Defund the Police movement is pointing out, that there is a relationship between over-policing and homelessness, that there is a problem of over-policing and homelessness, that the issues related to responding to mental health concerns with an armed force is extremely problematic. And we feel that daily when we're working with people and have limited to no places to call for sort of acute supports. We really like the phrase budget your values. And I think that you can feel that in the Defund the Police movement when they're talking about the over expenditures on policing and under expenditures on housing. And so we really support that movement and the stand that people have taken. And, I think that the defund movement really did take a licking in terms of an attack on their tactics. And I just want to say that, it's really hard in this context to be heard and to have an engaged conversation at the city on your own terms. And this politics of respectability and that you must go through the proper channels, have a visit to our timeline and you'll see how we went through all the respectable and all of the proper channels to no avail and almost ended up in a protracted court battle. So this issue needs to be taken on from every point of view, from every standpoint, in every tactic, because it's a life and death matter for people. And we're really interested in every possible angle being explored as to how we can bring that about.
So the last question, sorry, actually, does anybody else want to build on that? So the last question actually builds on that quite nicely, which is what can HamSmart and Keeping Six do to keep this issue of homelessness on the agenda for the next municipal election in 2022?
I mean, I would say stay tuned, because this issue has been around for decades, and it is going, until we see more affordable housing and a real political will to get folks housed in affordable housing and change the status quo, this is going to be a big issue. So we're not going away, for sure.
On top of that, we're just going to keep showing up and keep talking about it, and again, be a voice to the people that appear voiceless, right? I think it's more about what the people living rough and or precariously housed, even. Like, there's the number of evictions coming up, or that we've read that are coming up, is just show up, be there for them, and let people know that we're not going to go away. As long as there's people outside, we're going to be outside with them, figuratively.
Awesome. Marcy, I think we might let you have the last word then and wrap it up there. So just like a huge thank you to everybody that tuned in tonight, and also a huge thank you to everybody who spoke tonight and shared their reflections on the last several months and the injunction process and what's next. And yeah, I mean, it's been a wild time, and I'm so grateful to work with all of you. And I know that everybody watching, I get the vibe that people are engaged and involved in doing their own work, or already involved with Keeping Six and HamSmart and the community legal clinic. So it's so great to be with everyone working towards a Hamilton for everyone that serves everyone. So on that note, I think we will sign off our live broadcast. I'm going to stop our recording, and everybody can have a lovely, lovely rest of their evening.